G'day everybody, and welcome to this edition of IPhoneConservative. As some of my Facebook friends know, I recently took a week off. I was down at the New South Wales coastal town of Ulladulla. On Australia Day, I was walking down the main street, and as I approached the Marlin Hotel, the only pub in Ulladulla, I witnessed a curious incident. Two young blokes, obviously a little worse for wear, were attempting to gain entry into the hotel. The security at the door, obviously realising that these two blokes had started their Australia Day celebrations either a little early or a little too hard, were refusing them entry. The two blokes became increasingly agitated and started to verbally abuse the staff member. The larger of the two then thrust himself forward and yelled, "Are you kicking us out because we're black?" Well, I was as taken aback as the doorman obviously was, because the two blokes were as white as I am, and as you can see, I'm pretty white. Now, the doorman attempted to laugh this off, but you could see a certain wariness had crept into his eyes. This wasn't just some drunk blokes trying to get into a pub for another beer. This was a much darker dynamic. Now, the doorman replied he didn't care what colour they were pissed, and they weren't getting in. Now, you might be wondering why I'm telling you this story, but there are two troubling aspects to this incident. One, we have two young blokes who to all outward appearances are white, claiming to be discriminated against, and a doorman, not challenging their racial assertion, but rather granting them the benefit of the doubt by stating he didn't care what colour they were. The whole pathetic incident is a perfect example of how debased the race debate has become in this country, and led me to wonder how it was that we'd come to such a state. How is it that two individuals who, at least in appearance, belong to one racial group, white Australian, can claim the victimhood of another? Why is it that Andrew Bolt, a leading Sydney journalist, can be hauled into court for asking the same questions? Why have we allowed the privileging of difference in this country, of according special rights to certain groups? Well, there is a reason, an explanation for why this is becoming an all too commonplace occurrence in our society. Have a look at this clip, taken 1 year ago at Parliament House, Canberra, on Australia Day 2012.
This flag is definitely the flag of the enemy, that's right. They under this flag, gave them the right to kill a man of my family, and I'm not going to take it no more. No more. No more.
Well, as you might expect, community outrage erupted upon the broadcasting of this incident on the nightly news. The situation was further inflamed by the attitudes of the community leaders and the organisers, who not only condoned the actions of these young people, but had actively encouraged it. But the main brunt of the community anger, of course, fell on this young girl who'd featured in the burning of the Australian flag. Talkback Radio was ablaze with callers understandably outraged by her actions, and many people were calling for her to be charged with a variety of offences. Now, my position on the burning of flags is, well, if you absolutely must burn my flag, then please at least do me the courtesy of wrapping yourself in it first. But this time, I found myself in the unenviable position of having to defend this young girl. Not because I agree with her views in any way, and not for any reason to do with freedom of speech, Rather, it's because I understand the outrage, the anger that motivates her. And she is angry. She's angry because for all of her short life, she's been told that she's a victim of discrimination, of oppression, of doors being closed to her, not opened, merely because of the colour of her skin. She's been told repeatedly that she lives in a uniquely racist society, one that despises her and those like her, that engaged in active genocide against her people, and when that failed, took children just like her and forcibly removed them from their families in an effort to, as the term used to go, breed the colour out. This is the narrative that's pushed. Is it any wonder then that she sees desecrating and burning an Australian flag as being a perfectly acceptable, even rational act? Her rage, her sense of oppression, despite the fact that she's never known real oppression, they've all been carefully nurtured by certain individuals. And who are these individuals? Well, they're the community leaders and the spokespeople who continually push this narrative and nurture her sense of grievance, like gardeners working a particularly fertile piece of soil. Now, what can they possibly hope to gain from pushing such a divisive agenda, from fostering a sense of separation from the country and the culture in which she must reside? Well, to understand that, we're going to have to take a little look at earlier 20th century history. But before we do, I'd like you to take a look at this short clip from a series that aired on the ABC in 2012. Titled Dumb, Drunk and Racist, it was hosted by Joel Hildebrand, a Sydney-based journalist whose writing perfectly embodies the sort of progressive, left-wing, social justice mindset that is now so prevalent in our cultural elites. The series was advertised as a social experiment to take 4 individuals from India and travel around Australia, allowing them to interact with the various stratas of Australian society. The idea being to prove whether the stereotype that the title suggests was true or not. Now, many people had reservations concerning the aims and the objectivity of the series, the choice of host, the fact that the program was showing on the ABC, a broadcaster notorious for left-wing bias and progressive groupthink, and the provocative title itself, hinting that the conclusions might be, well, somewhat predetermined. Now, were the concerns of the show's critics justified? Well, let's have a look and find out.
Hi, I'm Joe Hildebrand, and I'm dumb, drunk and racist. Why? Because I'm an Australian.
You see, we Australians don't have the greatest reputation overseas.
It made Australia look like the land that time forgot.
I mean, the Australians are basically English rednecks, you know.
But it seems there's one country that has a worse view of us than any other. India.
Australia is a racist country. There is nothing secular or non-racial about them.
Worse still, many Indians believe they're not even physically safe here.
It seems that there has been another racist attack against another Indian.
It was 3 Indians versus 80 Australians.
50 officially registered attacks in 6 months.
They've probably forgotten that India has a nuclear bomb and they don't.
Thousands of Indian call centre workers phone us every day.
What's your long distance and toll calls?
Some have been taught Australians are dumb, drunk and racist. Why would that be?
Asian motherfucker, do I ring your fucking family, you fuckface?
Next time I want to speak to an Indian, I'll ring fucking the Indian takeaway, alright?
But at least we're good sports, right?
The problem with the Australians is they are very, very bad losers. They treat a sports field like a battlefield.
But why should we care what the Indians think of us? Well, for one thing, it's costing us money. Education is one of our biggest export earners, and Indian students don't want to come here anymore.
We like Australia, but Australians don't like us. That's what it comes to.
There's a disconnect between how the Indians see us and how we see ourselves. We reckon we're a bunch of good blokes in the land of the fair go. They think we're a bunch of rednecks in a land of racists. So who's right and who's wrong? To find out, I'm taking 4 Indians on a road trip around Australia. There's Mahima, a call centre worker.
They do say like, you bloody Asians, you fuck off.
Amir, a university student.
You're gonna get beaten up, you're an Indian. They beat up Indians.
Radhika, an education advisor.
Right now, we don't recommend Australia to students too much. Too much in the sense, not at all.
And Gurmeet, an anchorman on a major Hindi news network.
The Australian government should set a precedent in front of people that, yeah, we have made a law that will hang the people who will attack the Indian people.
I'll be introducing them to the good.
Delicious.
It's beautiful.
The bad.
You fucking wop fucking guinea bastard, dago cunt.
White fraud, motherfuckers.
And the bogan of my own country.
You bogan.
We'll discover through their eyes whether all these nasty stereotypes about Australians are true.
It's not every day you meet such a bunch of idiots.
Gentlemen, step right up. Abuse an Indian call centre worker. And we might even learn a few things about ourselves.
Australia has shoved this subject so deep under the carpet that I find it hard to even think about it.
Don't save anything.
There'll be desolation, infatuation,
Yes. You want a beer?
and maybe even some revelations. Every country has its negative stereotypes. But are Australians really dumb, drunk, and racist? Well, if you want to talk about racism, I know just the place. So welcome to Cronulla. This is North Cronulla Beach. Beautiful. Isn't it beautiful? Check out the view. What are your first impressions of the place?
Seems to be more like family kind of thing.
Also, there's something I've noticed.
There's something, sorry? Have you noticed anything?
There's a lot of white people here.
Sorry, what was that?
There's a lot of white people here.
There's a lot of white people.
The seagulls.
Even the seagulls
They too
are
are
white.
white.
Someone who grew up around here told me that North Cronulla Beach was always sort of quietly regarded as a whites-only beach. And one day, about 6 years ago, there was some Lebanese youths playing soccer on the beach. I think there was a complaint about it. A lifeguard got involved. Some words were exchanged. And all of a sudden, one thing led to another, and it escalated into a big dispute about what the Lebanese kids were doing on the beach in the first place. These are some of the messages that went out. This Sunday, every fucking Aussie in the Shire get down to North Cronulla to help support Leb and Wog Bashing Day. Bring your mates down and let's show them this is our beach and they're never welcome back.
Well, I think you get the idea. The interesting thing about that clip, which is pretty much typical of the rest of the series, is not so much what was said, but what was omitted. Let's take a look at that again.
And one day, about 6 years ago, there was some Lebanese youths playing soccer on the beach. I think there was a complaint about it. A lifeguard got involved. Some words were exchanged. And all of a sudden, one thing led to another, and it escalated into a big dispute about what the Lebanese kids were doing on the beach in the first place.
Hildebrandt states that the ensuing riots that occurred at Cronulla were the result of a dispute over a soccer game in which a lifesaver became involved. Now, let's look at a news report from the BBC detailing those same events that led up to the Cronulla riots.
They'd come to protest against Middle Eastern gangs at the beach, but ended up fighting running battles with police. Started as a protest after 2 beach lifeguards were attacked by Middle Eastern-looking youths this week. But heavy drinking and simmering racial tensions turned the crowd violent.
So, according to the BBC, it was the bashing of 2 volunteer lifesavers, a group that are particularly revered within Australian society, that precipitated the events leading to the Cronulla riots. Now, let me be absolutely clear. There is no justification for the orgy of violence that was perpetrated by that mob of drunken idiots. But why would you? What benefit could you receive from fundamentally misreporting the root causes of an incident that had such an impact on Australian society? Well, interestingly, the reason, the impetus to distort reality, to portray Australians, or white Australians at least, in the worst possible light, is exactly the same in both Joel Hildebrand and the leaders of the Aboriginal community. And that's why we now have to take that look at Western history in the early 19th and 20th centuries. In 1848, Karl Marx, in partnership with Friedrich Engels, published the Communist Manifesto. Originally titled the Manifesto of the Communist Party, it quickly became one of the most influential political manuscripts of all time. The central premise of this work was that the history of all societies was the history of class struggle, and that injustice and oppression would continue until the workers, or the proletariat, could seize the means of production and thereby usher in the socialist utopia. Now, to the socialists and the communists, Marx's ideas were not just political theories, but rather natural laws that followed predictable and understandable patterns. They believed that there was a scientific basis for the ideology that they espoused. In fact, they referred to their beliefs as social science. And it was within that framework of predictable, understandable social forces that the followers of Marx based their strategies for the overthrow of capitalism and the triumph of international socialism. A group of predominantly German, Jewish Marxist philosophers decided to set up what we now know as a think tank. Originally called the Institute for Marxism, its name was later changed to the Institute for Social Research. Located at Frankfurt University, it's come to be known simply as the Frankfurt School. Now, the members of the Frankfurt School, these Marxist philosophers such as Horkheimer, Erich Fromm, Marcuse, they began analysing the failures of Marxist theory in bringing about the expected socialist revolution. The great insight that the Frankfurt School, its members, achieved was the realisation that capitalism had brought such material wealth to its workers that their relative affluence had blinded them to their class consciousness. It was this realisation that it was the very success of the capitalist model to improve the lives of ordinary people that led the Frankfurt School members to make the momentous decision to divorce traditional Marxist theory from economics and to marry it to the culture. Now, as this was happening, a problem arose for the members of the Frankfurt School. The year was 1933, and Hitler's Nazi Party was in power. Now, you can understand that an organisation made up of Jewish Marxists, well, was not particularly welcome in Hitler's Third Reich. As such, the members of the Frankfurt School fled Germany and arrived in America and re-established the Institute for Social Research at Columbia University. And it was at Columbia that Horkheimer and his fellow Marxists developed the framework of what came to be known as critical theory. And what is critical theory? Well, Horkheimer, he described it as a tool to examine the entire material and spiritual culture of mankind in order to transform society as a whole. And what does that actually mean? Well, stripped of its camouflaging verbiage, critical theory is designed to do just one thing: criticise. It's that simple. Proponents of critical theory would identify and criticise every aspect of Western capitalist society that was considered to be cohesive to that society as a whole, attacking it, delegitimizing it until it became so weakened from within that it would be unable to resist the socialist revolution when it took place. And the root cause, or the foot soldiers of the revolution, the vanguard, well, they were no longer to be the workers of the world, but rather would now be the dispossessed. Women, homosexuals, minority groups, anyone that was perceived to be oppressed by the majority culture. To that end, they founded academic bodies and created pseudo-disciplines like gender studies, which employed feminism and women's rights movements to criticise the culture, labelling it an offensive patriarchy whose only aim was to keep women in a subservient position. That the very idea of male and female sexes were just social constructs used to perpetuate some sort of power dynamic. So too with human sexuality. A concerted effort was made to delegitimise the idea of normative sexual behaviour. Gay, lesbian, transgender studies continually attacked the family unit, using the language of the civil rights movement in the most duplicitous way to attack the accepted definition of, well, marriage. But it's in the area of race that cultural Marxism has proved to be so devastatingly effective. By dividing societies into tribes, special interest groups and enclaves, cultural Marxism has sought to destroy the very idea of a cohesive culture. Western civilization is continually described and attacked as the most racist and oppressive in human history. Any positive aspects of the culture must be ignored or dismissed, whilst any infraction, real or perceived, must be continually reiterated and magnified, reinforcing the idea that Western civilization in general, and white men in particular, are the ultimate oppressors. What critical theory cannot do, what it must never do, is provide context or comparisons with other culture. The status of women in other cultures or periods of history, well, that's off the table. The same goes for the treatment of homosexuals in, say, Saudi Arabia or Iraq. Because if you start comparing the treatment of these groups with other countries and other cultures, where women are treated as chattel or gays are put to death for the crime of their sexuality, well then Western civilization doesn't seem so bad, does it? And this is why we see the disconnect, the silence from the left on so many of these fundamental human rights issues, an area that the left normally claim as their own. Because to recognise and to criticise a non-Western culture for the very real abuses to women or gays or minority groups, well, that would collapse the house of cards that so much of critical theory is built upon. And it was this inherent weakness, this structural defect, that critical theory itself must not be subjected to critical analysis, that gave the thinkers of the Frankfurt School the greatest concern. They realised that if you constantly attacked the majority culture, eventually that culture would begin to push back. Cultural Marxism needed a way to protect itself while still being able to attack the societal structures. This led Herbert Marcuse to develop perhaps the most powerful weapon in the Marxist armoury. This concept, this weapon, we've come to know as political correctness. Now, political correctness is absolutely brilliant. By dividing society into ethnic minorities and identity groups, it says that these minority groups are deemed to be in need of protection from the majority culture. They become, to all intents and purposes, a protected species. Any criticism of these groups, well, that can't be allowed and must be treated not only as an attack against them, but also as indicative of some sort of moral failing. Political correctness says, if you're not part of the group, you have no right to comment on the group. Any criticism by those outside of the approved victim group must be based on racism or sexism, homophobia, or any other pejorative label that can be applied. Political correctness not only allows those subject to criticism to attack the questioner, it allows them to completely ignore the substance of the question. They don't have to respond, no matter how valid the point, because they don't talk to racists or misogynists or Islamophobes. This allows the practitioners of political correctness to eliminate competing views from the debate by denying them a platform at all. Janet Albrechtsen, a columnist in the Australian newspaper, she calls this technique death by silence. And it's best summed up by the German word Totschweigetaktik. Now, to be touched is to be subject to death by silence. Books, ideas and people that challenge the beliefs or the prejudices of the left are simply ignored. Those that are touched find that their views are left to expire soundlessly, like a butterfly in a jar. This insidious tactic has never been better described than by George Orwell, who was himself a victim of it. He stated, "At any given moment, there's an orthodoxy, a body of ideas which is assumed that all right-thinking people will accept without question. Anyone who challenges the prevailing orthodoxy finds himself silenced with surprising effectiveness. A genuinely unfashionable opinion is almost never given a fair hearing in either the popular press or in the highbrow periodicals." The limiting of public discourse has an even more dangerous consequence. The practitioners of political correctness have grasped the close connection between language and thought. So, by limiting that which can be said, they seek to limit that which may be thought. As Orwell's character Winston Smith discovered in the novel 1984, there's hardly any distance at all between speech crime and thought crime.
I was personally contacted by the arch-traitor Goldstein and ordered to assassinate certain inner-party officials.
Bugger.
This I did. My agents forged documents and gained entry to the Ministry of Truth.
Thought crime is death. Thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death.
With the result,
I have committed, even before setting pen to paper, the essential crime that contains all others in itself.
many hours of my free time encouraging my agents to deface party posters and hoarding announcements. I did counterfeit important party documents, including ex-London permits and travel passes, and that by use of these documents, my agents travelled freely throughout Airstrip 1, encouraging insurrection and organising a massive counterplot to destroy the innermost faction of the Oceanian leadership. Furthermore, I used my position of privilege within the inner party to pervert and betray the truth at all times, and to suggest wherever possible that our traditional allies in East Asia were in fact our deadly enemies.
April the 4th, 1984.
In my position as chief factory planner,
I think.
I stole military plans and at vast financial profit sold them to the Eurasian leadership.
To the past.
I was the
Or to the future.
of an attempt to subvert
To an age when thought is free.
and so I became open
From the age of Big Brother. From the age of the thought police.
under his direction. I assassinated a number of
From a dead man.
organizing false evidence.
Greetings.
It's not only about the privileging of certain favoured groups on the basis of their alleged victimhood, nor is it solely about the censorship of language that these groups may find objectionable. At its deepest level, it's an attack upon intellectual freedom itself. And that brings us back to Joel Hildebrand and that young girl we saw at the start of the episode. Do I think that Hildebrand or the leaders of the Aboriginal community who've influenced her outlook are Marxist operatives working to overthrow Western civilization? Of course not. They are merely the end product of over 50 years of continuous continuous indoctrination. Their views and actions are a litmus test of the effectiveness of the socialist infiltration of our society, the consolidation of Marxist thought in our media, our schools, the places of higher education. This is what the German intellectual Alfred Deutsch in 1962 called the long march through the institutions. And it's this worldview, this ideological perspective, that is becoming ever more firmly entrenched. This is why Joe Hildebrand sees racism lurking in every dark corner. And it's why that young girl believes that she is a victim of entrenched and organised oppression. It's a tribute to the effectiveness of cultural Marxism that most people don't even understand the political dimension of socialism. Its transformational mission to tear down the societal structures. They see it only as some sort of social justice position. And therein lies the danger to our society, because all the social ills, the inequalities that socialism purports to fix, are actually perpetuated and in many cases made worse by the very policies that they seek to promote. Hence we see the ethnic minorities like the Australian Aboriginal communities lagging behind other groups in health, in education, in standards of living and employment, despite ever increasing government spending year after year. Cultural Marxism and political correctness are not designed to solve inequality, but rather to perpetuate and to foster alienation and to fragment once cohesive societies. Many of us sense that something's wrong, that what we see and what we are told are not the same. But social paradigms are hard to shift. Their inertia is vast because people invest so much of who they are in them. But we have to try. Those groups that are truly disadvantaged, that young girl, they deserve better. The question is, are we too late?